Let's look at number 4. Which of the following would most logically complete the argument? So let's read the paragraph, try to digest all the information given, and then see if we can come up with what would be most logical to conclude with if we put everything together. So economists argue two things. They argue both that the higher turnover rate of part-time workers shows them to be a lot more dissatisfied with their jobs than full-time workers. And economists argue a second thing also, which is that lower paid part-time workers threaten to take jobs away from full-time workers. But, says the argument, because job efficiency is positively correlated with job satisfaction, companies are actually not likely to replace satisfied employees with dissatisfied ones. So if we put everything together, what does that mean? The economists said two things. They said that part-time workers are more dissatisfied, and then in the next breath, they said that, yeah, but part-time workers are also threatening to take jobs away from full-time workers. But wait a second. If this next sentence is true, that companies are unlikely to replace satisfied employees with dissatisfied ones, then that's probably not going to happen, right? This isn't adding up. It's not making sense, right? Because the economists say on the one hand that the part-time workers are more dissatisfied, but then they say that these dissatisfied part-time workers are threatening to take jobs away from the more satisfied full-time workers. Well, according to this argument, no, that doesn't work. Companies are unlikely to replace satisfied employees with dissatisfied ones. Therefore, no, this isn't going to play out in the way that the economists are predicting. That's what we should predict to be said here, because that's essentially what we are all but proving in the second to last sentence, which was brought as support for the therefore, right? Support, therefore, conclusion, right? So the economists are saying that things are going to happen in a certain way, that these dissatisfied part-time workers are going to take the jobs away from the satisfied full-time workers. But no, companies are unlikely to replace satisfied employees with dissatisfied ones. Therefore, the economists are wrong about how this is going to play out. It's not going to play out in the way they're saying. That's what we should expect. That would be the most logical thing here. So let's look for something along those lines in the answer choices. A says the conclusion should say that full-time workers are likely to lose their jobs to part-time workers. That's the opposite of what we predicted. We were trying to say that no, the economists are wrong. The economists are saying that A is going to happen, that full-time workers are going to have their jobs taken away by part-time workers. But the point of the paragraph is to say, no, that's not going to happen the way that they're saying, because they're contradicting themselves, because the part-time workers on the one hand are more dissatisfied, but no, that doesn't work because dissatisfied workers are unlikely to replace satisfied workers. So we're trying to say that no, this is not going to happen the way that the economists are saying it's going to play out. But A is doing the opposite of that. A is agreeing with the economists. So this doesn't make sense. B says that the conclusion should say, therefore, the companies that earn the greatest profits tend to be the ones that pay their workers the highest wages. I don't see how that connects to anything we said in the paragraph. The paragraph is about whether or not dissatisfied part-time workers are going to take the jobs away from more satisfied full-time workers. B doesn't really seem to address any of that, so it would be irrelevant if this were sort of stuck on as a conclusion at the end of the paragraph. It would be kind of a non sequitur. C says the conclusion should say, therefore, dissatisfied part-time workers are not likely to threaten the jobs of full-time workers. In other words, the economists are wrong. In other words, yes, that's correct. That's exactly what we would expect. That follows from what we just read, because the immediately preceding sentence, which was support brought for this conclusion that we're trying to fill in, the support for this conclusion says, companies are unlikely to replace satisfied employees with dissatisfied ones. It would make sense to say, therefore, C, therefore, dissatisfied part-time workers are not likely to take jobs away from full-time workers, right? Because of the previous sentence. Because no, companies are unlikely to replace satisfied employees with dissatisfied ones. Therefore, C, right, fits perfectly. Therefore, dissatisfied workers are unlikely to take jobs away from full-time workers. Fits absolutely perfectly, exactly what we would have expected. C is another way of saying it's unlikely to play out the way the economists are saying, which is exactly what the paragraph was building up to arguing. So therefore, C is correct. D says that the conclusion should say, therefore, the higher turnover rate of these part-time workers is only partly caused by the fact that they have greater job dissatisfaction. That doesn't really seem to tie everything together here. It has nothing to do with the prediction about whether the part-time workers are threatening the jobs of the full-time workers, right? So there's no evidence that D is true anywhere in this paragraph. There's no evidence that this higher turnover rate of part-time workers is only partly caused by their job dissatisfaction. Like, it's also caused by other things. There's other things that are causing this higher turnover rate. There's no evidence for these other factors anywhere in the paragraph. right? So this doesn't really make sense. We're not building up to making a conclusion like the one that it says in D. A more logical conclusion would be to say, therefore, the economists are wrong, because that would be directly supported by the sentence right before the word therefore, right? This sentence right before the word therefore, it wouldn't make sense to say this sentence and then therefore another sentence that wasn't having anything to do with the previous sentence, right? So it says companies are unlikely to replace satisfied employees with dissatisfied ones. Therefore, D, therefore the higher turnover rate of these part-time workers is only partly caused by their job dissatisfaction. Why would that be a logical follow-up to that previous sentence? That doesn't really make any sense. Why would the fact that companies are unlikely to replace satisfied employees with dissatisfied ones prove that their dissatisfaction is only one factor in their higher turnover, that there must be other factors in addition to their dissatisfaction? I don't see how that follows. D doesn't really make sense, and it's certainly not what we predicted. E says that therefore companies generally are only going to hire part-time workers when they are unable to hire full-time ones, that they only hire part-time if they don't have a choice, if they can't get full-time ones. I don't see why this would be supported by this paragraph, right? It seems to be a little too extreme. What the paragraph is trying to argue is that the economists seem to be wrong. The economists are saying that the part-time are threatening the full-time. And what would make sense for the conclusion to say is that no, since companies are unlikely to replace satisfied ones with dissatisfied ones, we have nothing to worry about. The part-time are not going to take away the jobs from the full-time. But that's not to say that that they only ever hire part-time workers when they're unable to hire full-time ones. Otherwise, they never hire any part-time workers. No, we're not going that far. We're just trying to say that the part-time workers are not threatening the workers that are full-time. They're not threatening to take away their jobs. But that doesn't mean that we never hire any part-time unless we can't get full-time, right? This is too extreme of a statement, has no support in the paragraph, and therefore is not correct. If you found this video useful, don't forget to hit subscribe. And for thousands more clear LSAT explanation videos, go to masterlsat.com.